It wasn't the thunder that broke the morning's peace. I'm used to thunder. Out here on the Texas plains, it's a regular conversation between the sky and the earth, a low rumble that promises rain for the pastures. It's a sound I understand, a sound I respect. No, the sound that turned my morning coffee bitter was the sharp, metallic snap of a bolt cutter. It was a sound that had no business being on my land. I was on the porch, the old wood creaking under my boots, just watching the storm clouds build in the west. Serenity Ranch. 3 generations of my family had called this place home. It was more than just property, it was a sanctuary. My sanctuary. And then I saw her, Karen Vance, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. She stood at my front gate, a ridiculous safari hat perched on her head, looking for all the world like she'd just conquered a wild frontier. Behind her sat a tour bus, painted a garish yellow, packed with faces peering out, my new neighbors. I started moving. "Karen!" I yelled, my voice swallowed by the rising wind. "This is private property! Don't you dare!" She saw me. I know she did. She gave a tight little wave, as if I were a friendly local feature on her guided tour. Then she turned back to her audience, her voice shrill enough to cut through the wind. "And here we have it, folks! Welcome to the Prairie Majesty Experience!" Prairie Majesty Experience. The sheer audacity of it almost knocked the wind out of me. She'd branded my home. She'd turned my life's work into a cheap roadside attraction. And then, with a final, triumphant grunt that I could see even from 100 yards away, she heaved the broken gate open. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Just the wind, the smell of dust and rain, and the collective stillness of 70 American bison watching the strange metal beast intrude upon their world. My lead bull, Diesel, took a step forward. He's a 2,000-pound wall of muscle and memory, and he knew that gate was never supposed to open like that. He lowered his head, and a low rumble started deep in his chest, a sound far more threatening than any thunder. The tourists inside the bus, they thought it was part of the show. I could see the phones and cameras pressed against the glass. They didn't understand. They saw a spectacle. I saw a fuse being lit. Diesel didn't charge. He surged, a force of nature unleashed, and where he went, the herd followed. The ground began to tremble, a low thrum that grew into a deafening roar. It was a river of dark fur and sharpened horn, a living, breathing storm pouring through the opening Karen had made. The delighted squeals from the bus quickly curdled into screams of genuine terror. My coffee mug shattered on the porch steps. I was already running, shouting for Chloe to call the sheriff, my mind racing faster than my feet. But my eyes weren't on Karen, who was now pressed against the side of the bus, her face a mask of disbelief. They weren't even on the herd. They locked onto a splash of red against the dull brown earth. A little boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He'd wandered off the bus, drawn by curiosity, and was now standing frozen in the open pasture, his face a perfect little O of terror, and 70 tons of panic and muscle were thundering straight for him. The old ranger training, it never really leaves you. It's a quiet switch that flips in the back of your mind in moments of pure crisis. Anger would have to wait. Fear would have to wait. A child's life wouldn't. I knew I wouldn't make it in time. But Diesel, he did something I'll never be able to fully explain. Instead of running the boy down, the great bull veered at the last possible second. He turned his massive body, lowering his shoulder like a linebacker, and became a living, breathing breakwater. He altered the path of the entire herd, creating a space, a pocket of safety around that terrified child as the tide of horns and hooves parted around them. The immediate danger had passed, but the boy, startled into motion, scrambled away. He ran from the thunder of the herd, straight into the woods at the edge of my property, just as the sky finally opened up. Rain fell in blinding sheets. He was gone. I reached the gate, my lungs burning. I grabbed the shoulder of the bus driver, whose face was ashen. "Call it in!" I commanded, my voice raw. "Missing child! Tell them an ex-ranger is on site and beginning a search grid from these coordinates." I didn't wait for an answer. I plunged into the rain-soaked woods, Chloe right behind me. For the next 2 hours, the world shrank to a single purpose. We tracked footprints turning to mud, followed broken twigs, called his name, Leo, into the growing storm. We found him because Diesel found him first. We saw the bull standing motionless under a rocky overhang, steam puffing from his nostrils. He wasn't menacing. He was standing guard. Tucked into a dry hollow behind him was the boy, shivering but unharmed. I wrapped my own jacket around his small shoulders, murmuring that it was all going to be okay. When we carried him out of the woods and returned him to his weeping mother, I finally allowed myself to look at Karen Vance. She was a sodden, pathetic figure, her safari hat ruined, but the look in her eyes, it wasn't relief, it wasn't gratitude, it was cold, it was calculating. I had just saved a child's life, but in her eyes I could see she was already figuring out how to use it against me. The storm outside was passing. The one Karen Vance was about to unleash, that was just beginning. I was right to be worried about that look in her eyes. The look I saw on Karen Vance's face as I carried that little boy out of the woods wasn't just cold. It was the look of a predator whose hunt had been interrupted, already calculating its next move. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights and official voices. The sheriff's deputies arrived, followed by paramedics who checked Leo over and declared him perfectly fine, aside from being cold and scared. His parents, a young couple named Miller, couldn't thank me enough, their words tumbling over each other in a flood of relief. But I noticed something strange. The deputies, they weren't treating me like a hero. They were treating me like a liability. Their questions were all sharp edges and implied blame. So, Mr. Thorne, can you explain your containment protocols for these animals? Have you had prior incidents of your livestock escaping their enclosure? Karen, meanwhile, had wrapped herself in a blanket someone had given her, playing the part of the shaken but responsible community leader. She spoke to one of the deputies in a low, earnest voice, pointing toward my ranch, then toward the bus, her hands fluttering in a pantomime of distress. She was planting the seeds of her story right there in the mud and the rain before the ground had even dried. I saw the narrative being stolen from me in real time, but the full brazen theft of the truth wouldn't become clear until the next morning. Chloe walked into the kitchen, her face grim. She was holding her tablet, and she just set it down on the old oak table between our coffee cups. She didn't have to say anything. The headline was from a local online news blog I'd never heard of. Terrifying stampede at Whispering Pines. HOA President's quick action averts tragedy. My jaw tightened. I started to read. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a work of art, if you appreciate lies. According to the article, Karen Vance's educational community outing had been disrupted by an unprovoked and aggressive charge from my unsecured bison herd. It painted a picture of her heroically coordinating with emergency services while a negligent landowner was nowhere to be found. It mentioned the lost child, Leo, but framed his rescue as a desperate community effort that she had led. My name was attached to quotes I never said, admissions of faulty fencing I never made. They took a story of a boy's rescue, and they'd twisted it into a weapon to be used against me. "This is slander, Chloe," I said, my voice low and hard. "This is a damn lie. It's worse than that," she replied, her reporter's instincts firing on all cylinders. She tapped the screen. "Look at this. This blog was registered 2 months ago. Its only advertisers are real estate companies, and this one," she swiped, "this one is a press release published verbatim on 3 other sites just like it." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "This isn't just bad reporting, Ethan. This is a coordinated PR campaign. Somebody paid for this story." For the next few days, a cold war settled over the ranch. A couple of the older neighbors stopped by, bringing pies and offering quiet support. They knew my family. They knew the truth. But from the Whispering Pines development, there was only silence and suspicious glances. I'd see cars slow down as they passed my gate, their occupants pointing and whispering. I felt like an exhibit in a zoo of my own making while I repaired the gate, reinforcing it with a new steel chain that could stop a tank. Chloe was on her own hunt. She spent hours in the office, fueled by coffee and a righteous anger that I found both terrifying and beautiful. She was a journalist to the bone, and she hated a manufactured lie more than anything. She traced website registrations. She cross-referenced public business filings. She fell down a rabbit hole of shell corporations and advisory boards, and then one evening she found it. "Ethan!" she called out from the office. Her voice was different. It wasn't just angry anymore. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that means you found the center of the storm. I walked in and found her staring at a complex web of names and arrows she'd drawn on a whiteboard. "Karen Vance isn't just an overzealous HOA president," Chloe said, pointing to a name in a box. 4 years ago, she was appointed to the Community Advisory Board of this entity, Omni Development Group. The name meant nothing to me. "Omni is a shell company," Chloe continued, drawing a line to another larger box. "It's owned, lock, stock, and barrel by Prestige Holdings." That name I knew. They were a ruthless, aggressive land developer out of Dallas. They had a reputation for buying up ranch land, tearing it down, and putting up sprawling, identical housing tracts. Chloe tapped Karen's name again. "Her job on this advisory board is to identify potential expansion zones and mitigate local obstacles. That's the term they use." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The safari, the media campaign, the complaints. It wasn't about a view or noise or a petty power trip. It was never about the buffalo. It was about the land beneath their feet. "They want my ranch," I said. It wasn't a question. "They want it all," Chloe confirmed. "And Karen's job is to make your life so miserable, to paint you as such a public menace, that you either sell it to them for pennies on the dollar or the county forces you out." This whole Prairie Majesty experience, it was a planned provocation. A cold fury, deeper and harder than any anger I'd felt before, settled in my gut. I wasn't fighting a foolish woman anymore. I was fighting a corporation. I was fighting a plan. And that plan was about to escalate. It happened 3 nights later. The air was still and heavy. Even the coyotes were silent. I was out on the porch just listening to the sounds of the night when Diesel let out a low guttural snort from the far pasture. It was a sound of agitation, of wrongness. And then the security alarm Chloe had insisted we install shrieked through the night. It wasn't the gate alarm. It was a perimeter sensor, Zone 4, the back fence, the one that runs for half a mile alongside the old state highway. We were in the truck in 30 seconds, bouncing over the rough terrain, headlights cutting through the oppressive dark. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I saw it from 50 yards out, a gaping hole in the fence line. The wire wasn't broken. It was cut, cleanly, with bolt cutters. "Chloe, call 911. Now," I said, my voice tight. "Tell them there's livestock loose, heading for Highway 87. I could see them now, dark shapes moving nervously in the beam of my headlights. Most of the herd was still bunched together, confused, but a few of the younger, spookier ones were already drifting toward the faint glow of the highway lights. I could hear the distant rumble of an 18-wheeler gearing down. What followed was the most dangerous, high-stakes roundup of my life. I jumped out of the truck, leaving Chloe at the wheel. "Use the truck to block their path! Don't get too close, just be a wall!" I yelled over the wind. I ran, my boots slipping in the damp soil, using the low whistles and calls the herd knew. It was a delicate dance in the dark, trying to turn them back without causing a full-blown stampede. Chloe was brilliant, maneuvering the big truck with a precision I'd never seen, its lights creating a moving barrier of light and shadow. One by one, we got them turned. But Diesel, he was standing right at the edge of the property line, sniffing the air, his great form silhouetted against the distant highway. He was the king. If he went, they would all follow. "Diesel!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Come on, old man, back! Get back!" He looked at me. then at the highway, then back at me. For a long second, he held his ground. Then, with a sigh that seemed to shake the very ground, he turned his massive body and began to slowly walk back toward the safety of the pasture. The rest of the herd followed. When the last one was through the gap, my adrenaline gave out, leaving me shaking. We found the tracks. A heavy-duty pickup, not from around here. They had parked a quarter-mile down the road, walked in, cut the fence, and left. It was a deliberate, calculated act. An act designed to cause a catastrophic accident. An accident that would have been entirely my fault in the eyes of the law. I stood there in the quiet of the night, the flashing lights of the deputy's car now visible in the distance. Chloe came and stood beside me, her hand finding mine in the dark. Karen Vance hadn't just trespassed on my land anymore. She hadn't just lied about me. She had just shown me she was willing to get people killed to win. A cold resolve settled over me. This was no longer a fight about property lines or bad press. This was a war, and I was done playing defense. The next morning, the sun rose on a different man, the man who had just wanted to be left alone, who just wanted to watch his buffalo roam in peace, was gone. He'd vanished somewhere in the dark of night, beside a cut fence on the edge of a highway. In his place stood someone else. Someone who understood that you can't reason with a snake. You have to draw a line. You have to fight back. The war Karen Vance had declared was no longer a one-sided affair. "She crossed a line, Chloe," I said, watching the sun glint off the newly repaired fence line. "There are no more second chances, no more benefit of the doubt." "So what's the plan?" Chloe asked, her voice steady. She was already in her element, organizing, planning. "The plan," I said, "is we stop playing her game. We start playing ours." Our first call was to a man named Arthur Bellamy, a lawyer down in Austin who had a reputation for chewing up land developers and spitting them out. He was expensive, but for the first time, we weren't just defending. We were preparing to attack. I laid out the whole story for him over the phone, from the fake safari to the fence. He was quiet for a long time. "It's a classic corporate predator playbook, Mr. Thorne," he finally said, his voice a gravelly Texas drawl. "They create the problem, then they campaign on the solution. Your HOA president is their foot soldier. We can fight this, but I need everything. Every photo, every email, every timeline." Chloe had already done it. She'd built a digital fortress of evidence. Photos of the cut gate lock, screenshots of the slanderous articles, a detailed timeline of events, and her entire investigation linking Karen Vance to Prestige Holdings. We sent it all. Our next call was to the Miller family, the parents of the boy Leo. I was hesitant, not wanting to drag them further into this mess, but Chloe insisted. "They are the emotional truth of this story, Ethan. People will listen to them." Mrs. Miller answered on the first ring. When I explained what was happening, how Karen was twisting the story of their son's rescue, there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "That woman," she said, her voice trembling with a quiet rage I understood all too well. "She told us the county was investigating you for negligence. She made it sound like she was protecting us from you. Mr. Thorne, whatever you need, a statement, a witness, anything, you have it. We had a lawyer. We had evidence. We had a powerful ally. We were building an army. And then we found out where the battle would be fought. It arrived in the mail 2 days later. An official county notice, thick and important looking. It was a public announcement for a community planning and zoning hearing. The primary agenda item, a rezoning proposal submitted by Prestige Holdings for the parcel of land directly adjacent to mine. The notice mentioned that local business owners and community leaders would be invited to speak. And listed there, under scheduled community speakers, quote, was her name, Karen Vance, President, Whispering Pines HOA. "This is it," Chloe said, her finger tracing Karen's name. "This is her endgame. She's going to stand up in front of the county commissioners and use every lie she's spun to paint you as a public menace. She'll argue that your ranch is a threat to the community's safety, making the new development a necessary buffer. A stage, I murmured. She's building herself a stage. The hearing was in 5 days. The clock was ticking. Our lawyer, Arthur, confirmed our fears. It's a strong case we're building, he told us on a conference call, but her lawyers will call your evidence circumstantial. They'll say you have no proof she was directly involved in the fence cutting. They'll paint her as a concerned citizen and you as a disgruntled neighbor with a grudge. We need a knockout punch, a smoking gun. We spent the next few days preparing, going over every detail, every piece of evidence, but that feeling of something missing hung in the air. We could prove Karen's motive with the Prestige Holdings connection. We could prove her character with the safari incident, but we couldn't definitively tie her to the most dangerous act of all. We were still one piece short of a checkmate. The piece arrived on a Tuesday night in a beat-up sedan that sputtered up our driveway like it was on its last breath. I saw the headlights and my hand instinctively went to the heavy maglite I now kept by the door. Chloe peered out the window. Ethan, I think that's Mark. Mark, the HOA vice president, the man who had stood by and filmed the whole safari mess. I opened the door, my posture wary. He looked terrible. His clothes were rumpled, his face was pale and unshaven, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered, wringing his hands. Can I talk to you for a minute? Please." I led him into the kitchen. He wouldn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, a ghost haunted by his own silence. "I can't do it anymore," he whispered. I heard her. After the fence thing, she thought you'd be facing lawsuits, maybe even charges. When she found out you got the herd back with no incident, she was furious." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate mix of fear and shame. "I've got a kid, Mr. Thorne, a little girl. What if she'd been on that highway? What if anyone had been? This whole thing, it's gone too far. It's not right." I stayed silent, letting him talk. "I'm not brave like you," he continued, his voice cracking. "I'm scared of her. I'm scared of those developer people. But I can't live with this." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out his phone, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. She called me right after she found out you'd fixed the fence so fast. She was ranting. She didn't know I have an app. It records all my phone calls. For my sales job, I forgot it was even on... He pressed a button on the screen, and then I heard it. Karen Vance's voice. Not the polished, charming voice she used for the public. This was her real voice. It was raw, filled with a venom that made my skin crawl. "He got lucky. That old fool and his pet buffalo got lucky. One dead cow on the highway is all I needed to shut him down for good. We might have to arrange another accident. A more permanent one." My blood ran cold. Chloe, standing in the doorway, put a hand over her mouth. Mark switched off the recording. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a signed confession, delivered in her own poisonous words. I looked at Mark, this nervous, broken man who had finally found an ounce of courage. Then I looked at Chloe, whose eyes were wide with a look that said, "We got her. We finally had her." The hearing was in 2 days. Karen Vance was building a stage to publicly execute my family's legacy. She had no idea she was actually building her own gallows. The air in the county commissioner's hearing room was thick and stale, smelling of old paper and cheap coffee. It was a room designed to feel important, with dark, polished wood, flags standing stiff in the corners, and stern-faced portraits of long-dead county officials staring down from the walls. It was a room designed for arguments and pronouncements, and I had a feeling it was about to see one for the ages. We sat on one side, me, Chloe, and our lawyer, Arthur Bellamy, a man who looked as solid and immovable as a boulder. He'd given me one last piece of advice before we walked in. "Let her build her own cage, Ethan," he'd said with a grim smile. "Then you just calmly lock the door." On the other side sat Karen Vance. She was no longer the disheveled, panicked woman from the storm. Today, she was transformed. She wore a severe navy blue suit. Her hair was sprayed into a perfect helmet, and she sat with a look of unshakable civic concern on her face. Beside her was a smug-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than my truck. He was Prestige Holdings' lawyer, here to back her play. The room was packed. I saw some of my neighbors, the ones who had brought pies and offered quiet words of support. They gave me small, encouraging nods. I saw other residents from Whispering Pines, their faces a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. They were the jury, and sitting quietly in the back, waiting, were the Millers, Leo's parents. They were our ace in the hole. Finally, the head commissioner, a formidable woman named Judge Albright, banged her gavel. "This hearing is now in session. The primary item on the agenda is the rezoning application for Parcel 7B, submitted by Prestige Holdings. We will begin with community statements. First up, Ms. Karen Vance." Karen walked to the podium with a practiced confidence. She adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to weave her web. "Commissioners, members of the community," she started, her voice filled with a carefully modulated sincerity. "I stand before you today not just as the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, but as a neighbor, as a friend, and as someone deeply concerned for the safety of our families." She was good. I had to give her that. She painted a picture of a peaceful, idyllic community living under the shadow of a constant threat. "The idyllic peace of our neighborhood," she continued, her voice rising with passion, "is shattered daily by the knowledge that a ticking time bomb rests on our border. A large, privately owned herd of unpredictable, wild animals, contained by what has been proven to be inadequate fencing." She gestured to a large screen where a picture popped up. It was a photo from the day of the safari, taken from an angle that made my herd look menacing, their horns pointed, their eyes wild. It was a moment of fear. Yes, but a fear she had created. She presented it as their natural state. "I speak to you today as a mother," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "as a neighbor who fears for the safety of our children playing in their own backyards. We all saw what happened just a few weeks ago, when these animals escaped their enclosure in an aggressive stampede, endangering the lives of residents and even trapping a small child in a terrifying ordeal." She clicked to the next photo. It was a picture of Leo, the boy, looking small and lost. It was a manipulative, low blow, and I felt my hands clench into fists under the table. Arthur placed a calming hand on my arm. "Let her build the cage," she concluded with a flourish. "The proposed development by Prestige Holdings isn't just a project, it's a solution. It provides a necessary and professionally managed buffer between our homes and this wildness. It ensures our property values, our peace of mind, and most importantly, our safety. To oppose it is to invite tragedy. I urge you to put our community first." She sat down to a smattering of polite, uncertain applause. She had laid her trap perfectly. She'd made it seem like a simple choice between safety and danger, between progress and negligence. "Thank you, Ms. Vance," Judge Albright said. "The next speaker is Mr. Ethan Thorne." I walked to the podium. I didn't have a slideshow. I didn't have a prepared speech. I just had the truth. I looked out, not just at the commissioners, but at the faces in the crowd. "Good evening," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the microphone. "My name is Ethan Thorne. My family has ranched that land you're discussing since my grandfather came home from Europe in 1945. For 75 years, those buffalo, not wild animals, but American bison, a symbol of this country's heritage, have lived peacefully on that land. In all that time, there has never been a single incident. Not until Ms. Vance arrived with a tour bus and a pair of bolt cutters. A murmur went through the room. "You've heard talk of a stampede," I continued, keeping my eyes on the commissioners. "The more accurate term for what happened is a provoked flight. It was caused by an illegal trespass, a broken lock, and a crowd of strangers invading the animal's home. You saw a picture of a terrified child. You deserve to know the full story of that child." I took a breath. "But you don't have to take my word for it. There are people here today who experience Ms. Vance's leadership firsthand. With the board's permission, I'd like to invite Mr. and Mrs. Miller to the podium." Judge Albright nodded, her expression unreadable. The Millers walked to the front, their faces resolute. Mrs. Miller spoke first, her voice shaking but strong. "My son's name is Leo," she said. "I was on that bus. I saw Miss Vance cut the lock. I saw her ignore Mr. Thorne's warnings. When my son was lost, she fell apart. It was Mr. Thorne who took charge. It was Mr. Thorne who tracked my son through a storm for 2 hours. And it was his Buffalo Diesel who found my son and stood guard over him until he was safe." She turned and looked directly at Karen. "Miss Vance never spoke to us after that day," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "except to imply through others that Mr. Thorne was the one we should be afraid of. She lied. My family is here tonight to say one thing. Ethan Thorne is not a threat to this community. He is the reason my son is safe today." The emotional weight of her words settled over the room. Karen Vance's face was a stony mask, but I could see the panic starting to flicker in her eyes. The cage door was swinging shut. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I turned back to the board. "The question is, why? Why would Ms. Vance go to such lengths? Why create a fake tour, break the law, and then launch a coordinated media campaign to slander my name?" This was Chloe's cue. She stepped forward and handed a folder to the clerk. "Commissioners," she said crisply, "my name is Chloe Davis. The documents in that folder are public records. They show that Ms. Karen Vance sits on a paid advisory board for a shell company wholly owned by Prestige Holdings. Her primary role is to mitigate local obstacles to their development projects. This isn't about community safety. It's about a clear, documented, and unethical conflict of interest." A gasp went through the crowd. Judge Albright's eyes narrowed as she looked through the papers. The Prestige Holdings lawyer shot to his feet to object, but she waved him down with a single sharp gesture. The cage was built. The evidence was presented. It was time to lock the door. I took the microphone for the last time. Ms. Vance's plan was simple: create a problem, then sell the solution. But the problem she created almost got a child lost in a storm. And when that wasn't enough, her campaign escalated. I paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. It escalated to a deliberate act of sabotage in the middle of the night, a cut fence designed to send my herd onto a public highway. "That is an outrageous and unsubstantiated accusation," Karen's lawyer shouted. "Is it?" I asked calmly. I looked directly at Karen, whose face had gone from stony to pale white. "I agree that a person's public statements can be very different from their private ones, and I think this board and this community deserves to know what Ms. Vance's frustration sounds like in private." I pulled out my phone, the one Mark had given me the recording from, and held it up to the microphone. I pressed play. Dead silence fell over the room, and then her voice, her real voice, sharp, ugly, and full of venom, filled the chamber. "He got lucky! That old fool and his pet buffalo got lucky. One dead cow on the highway is all I needed to shut him down for good. We might have to arrange another accident, a more permanent one." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier than any I have ever known. It was the sound of a career ending, the sound of a conspiracy being laid bare, the sound of a lie finally dying. Karen Vance didn't even try to speak. She just shrank in her chair, her face a ghastly shade of grey. The smug lawyer beside her looked like he'd swallowed poison. Judge Albright stared down from the dais, her expression one of utter contempt. She banged her gavel, the sound cracking through the stillness like a gunshot. "This hearing," she declared, her voice cold as steel, "is suspended, pending an immediate investigation by the district attorney's office into bribery, conspiracy, and public endangerment." It was over. There was no cheering, no applause, just a heavy, profound silence. The cage was locked, and the predator was finally trapped inside. In the end, Karen Vance didn't run. She didn't scream or protest. As the commissioners filed out and the murmuring crowd began to disperse, she just deflated. All the sharp angles and manic energy seemed to drain out of her, leaving a hollowed-out woman in an expensive suit. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she rose stiffly from her chair and walked out of the hearing room without looking at anyone. She didn't make a sound. It was the quietest she'd been since this whole mess started. The fallout was swift and decisive. The district attorney's office launched a formal investigation. Faced with the recording, Mark's testimony, and a dozen angry residents now willing to speak, Karen's entire house of cards collapsed. She and 2 executives from Prestige Holdings were indicted on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Prestige, facing a mountain of bad press and a host of civil lawsuits from angry HOA members, pulled their rezoning application and issued a sterile corporate apology. Their grand plans for my corner of Texas had vanished like a mirage in the summer heat. We never saw Karen Vance again. About a month after the hearing, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. It sold quickly. One of my neighbors, a retired Marine named Frank with a wicked sense of humor, joked that we should send a welcome basket and a warning letter to her new HOA. I laughed, but we never did. I figured they'd find out about her soon enough on their own. Some storms you just have to let blow themselves out. With Karen gone, the atmosphere in Whispering Pines changed. It was like a fever had broken. The HOA was reorganized. The new board was led by Mr. Miller, Leo's father, a sensible engineer who believed in rules that made sense, not rules designed for power. One of their first official acts was to draft a formal, community-wide letter of apology to me and Chloe. They even offered to pay for the new gate lock. I drove down to their next meeting, the first one I'd ever attended willingly. I told them I appreciated the gesture, but they could keep the money. The only thing I ever wanted was respect for the fence line, I told them. The apology is more than enough. That was the beginning of the healing. To celebrate and to properly reintroduce the ranch to the community as a neighbor instead of a threat, Chloe had an idea. We decided to host an open ranch day. Not a tour, not a spectacle, just an invitation. We held it on a bright, clear Saturday in October. We worked with the local 4-H club and a science teacher from the high school to set up small educational booths about bison conservation and local ecology. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people came. They didn't come to Gork like tourists. They came as neighbors. They brought potluck dishes and folding chairs. Kids ran barefoot in the pasture that I kept clear for parking, their laughter filling the air. Frank, the Marine, even brought a homemade piñata that looked suspiciously like a woman in a safari hat. The kids, and more than a few adults, took turns whacking it with a foam bat. It was a catharsis for the whole community. Diesel and the herd watched calmly from the main pasture behind a sturdy, permanent safety fence we'd set up for the day. People lined up, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of awe. They took photos. They asked questions. They saw the animals not as monsters, but as what they were, a majestic piece of America's past, living right here in its present. Mr. and Mrs. Miller stood with us for most of the day, with little Leo on his father's shoulders, pointing at Dazzle and calling him my big fuzzy friend. Near the end of the day, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mr. Miller stepped up to a small microphone we'd set up for music. "I just want to say one thing," he said, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. This community is better and stronger because we have neighbors like Ethan and Chloe. They reminded us that a neighborhood isn't just about property values. It's about character. It's about looking out for each other and standing up for the truth. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. That night, after the last car had pulled away and a profound quiet had settled back over the land, Chloe and I sat on the porch, our dog curled up between our boots. The air was cool and clean. I looked out at the vast dark pasture, where I could just make out the massive silhouette of Diesel lying peacefully under a blanket of stars. He was the quiet king of his domain once more. He had endured the storm, just as the land itself had endured generations of change. He and this ranch, they represented something solid, something real. In a world of flimsy lies and manufactured outrage, this was the truth. It was dirt and grass and muscle and bone. Karen Vance had come to my ranch and opened a gate, thinking she was unleashing chaos to serve her own greed, and she did. But it wasn't the chaos of stampeding animals she should have feared. She unleashed the truth, and once the truth is running free, no fence on earth can ever hold it back.